Okay, so I ended the last video, which was the second video, um, in response to Fred's video about the self, the sense of self, and language and things like that. So I'd mentioned that the original question is who is this conscious someone? And then cognitive neuroscience has tended to turn the question, and evolutionary perspectives have tended to turn the question into they invoke some version of the self, right, that they have a model for, and then they try to fit it in. So they got the theory first, and then they try to fit it in there, and they say what is, that's the question. That's now the guiding question. It goes from who to what. What is this self? And then it changes into, of course, how. Now, how is this model that we've decided to pick? How is it? How's the brain generating this? You know, um, and you can see where by the time that we try to figure out. I mean, obviously the questions are going to guide our experimental exploration, and the questions guide the kind of assumption, or well, they are telling of the kind of assumptions that we're making already, and the questions guide the research as it goes. But we aren't any closer to understanding who, which was the original question, is who. So we've tried to, what we said the what question, and we said the how question. We didn't get the who, but the who is not about really the self. So much. I mean, if you really want to get to the heart of it, I mean, yeah, the self is still a viable concept, but personal identity is really the question here. So the question is, do you maintain a sense of personal identity over time, and if so, how? So yeah, and I think that's a fair question. And this is a different question than, so now we have two how questions. How does the brain generate this sense of self? And how does our sense of personal identity persist over time? If it does, I think it does. These are two fundamentally different questions. One is one is, you talk about the self and the how, and it's really bound up with the what. What is this thing? And they're going to go two ways usually. They're going to say that it is the brain, or they're going to say that it's just an abstract information that's just or a pattern of information supervenient upon the physical brain that is just sort of an illusion. So it's either you're really a fiction, or you just are the physical thing. It's just this classic back and forth wish-wash that you've had between idealism and realism all over again. But I guess I'm being pretty critical. But this just seems to be the way that it's been going. We're not making any really good progress in the cognitive sciences. I don't even know why it's called the cognitive science anymore. Cognitive sciences, it's not all about cognition, which is pretty clear. Just using that language is confusing. So, how does the brain generate a sense of self? How do I maintain identity over time? And what is it? Who is it? I mean, so these are we have to keep these questions separate, and personal versus subpersonal and all that. What else was I going to say? Okay. Prototypical objects. You said that you said that. Let's get to the yes/no thing. Okay. So boundedness. We think of and talk. You said we think of and talk about the self as a kind of object, a noun, and you said it could be like a metaphorical, a hypothetical thing. I don't think that that's really true for when we're actually saying that the self is a hypothetical or metaphorical object. Not quite in the way that we're implementing it. When we're speaking, we're not thinking about an object. We're thinking about a person. We're just sort of like we're referencing them usually, unless we're talking about the concept of the self, and if we're talking, say, we're having a debate or an argument or a discussion in cognitive science or in philosophy of mind. Yeah, then we could be talking about the self as an object, and we could talk about it metaphorically or hypothetically. But I think we've talked about it very concretely, and the origin of the concept of self, or the origin of selves comes through this interaction and just talking to each other. Very. I mean, in the most concrete possible terms that you could use, a word in its concreteness would be about, myself and my feelings, and and yourself, and how we are interact, how we feel about each other, and what I want you to do, and what I want from you, and what I, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know where this idea that it's just an illusion, or that it's a metaphor, or just something hypothetical comes from. I think it's very, just as real as, uh, you know, uh, just as real as a dolphin's echolocation, or a squirrel. That's terrible. That sounds stupid, but just as real as, say, um, you know, sugar is tasty for a single cell organism, or, tasty really is a metaphor, or a bad analogy there, but I mean, it's not like, oh, but the sugar isn't really sweet. I mean, no, I mean, the sugar really, when you put sugar on your tongue, really is a property of the interaction, just as real as things get. Taste is a real thing. It's a relational property between an organism and the environment, just like talking about a self is just an emergent property that comes out of this social animal. It's not an abstraction, unless you want to think of abstraction as something very natural that certain animals do. I think that it is. And you have to abstract from your environment, and this is just one way of abstracting from the environment to make things easier. Okay, so what was I going to say? Okay, so you said that objects have rigid boundaries. They have a clear cutoff between what is and what is not the object, and we aspire to the condition or liken the self to well-defined boundaries. So you're saying that the self basically is something that aspires to, or somehow has some sort of teleology, or tendency toward objectifying itself as a prototypical object, which endures, which has well-defined boundaries, and which is rather robust and not fragile. Yeah, okay. I mean, maybe. I don't know in what way you might mean that. I mean, this whole idea of the yes-no dichotomy being what separates, what gives a boundary, a well-formed boundary. In phenomenology, you would call the object's inner and outer horizon, is precisely the difference between the figure and the ground. Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think that it makes sense that yes/no binary questions are what demarcates the self. I mean, they could definitely have a role in sedimenting already formed structures, but you're not going to just. I mean, think about Hegel in the Phenomenology of Spirit, or some of Wittgenstein's ideas. But Hegel in the Phenomenology of Spirit, his first chapter is called Sense Certainty, and he's talking about every, we talk about the this here, but really the this here is also an above and a below and a right and a left, and every above is a below and a right and a left, every left is a right, everything is relative to everything else, and that in order to know, um, what's what, you have to already have, he says, a history of becoming. You're not just starting from scratch. The point is that in order for me to say yes or no to something, I have to already have a history. I already have to be that thing in order to have a reply to you. If you say, um, if a child looks in the mirror and goes, "Oh, I see me," I mean, it only sees that because the me is already there to be seen. You see, it's not, saying that the yes/no questions are what forms the self, or like saying that mirror images are what forms the me for the child. No, the me's there first. The basis, for the foundation, for the distinctions are there before any really explicit choice. So before we choose to be in a context or choose about these decisions about ourselves, we've already find ourselves in these situations. And so I think the yes/no questions come after already having formed these parts of the self in large part. or they're just one small part of a bigger process of becoming a cell.